while since I've filmed in front of the camera. I apologize, I suppose, but considering most of my recent subscribers haven't been for the book content, I don't think that many people mind as much. At some point I'll pick it up again, probably not for a while though, we'll see. You know, we're not here for books today, as you can probably tell by the title. So since I last did a in front of the camera thing where I'm actually filming me, I have gained a new hyperfixation, as you can probably tell by the TikTok compilations that have been coming out. Obviously that new hyperfixation is improv comedy group Shoot From the Hip. When I hyperfixate on things, I make playlists. As you probably know, since I think majority of my recent subscribers are here specifically for the Shoot From the Hip TikTok compilations and the playlist that I have with all of the public Shoot From the Hip YouTube videos in them. So every single video I can find on YouTube that has any of the members of Shoot From the Hip in it, in one place from oldest to newest. As you can tell, new people who are watching me in front of the camera for the first time, I'm kind of awkward and I stumble across the thing and fail to get to the point very frequently. So I will stop delaying anymore. I've made another new playlist, a Shoot From the Hip long forms in chronological or a timeline order, which will be linked in the description and available public to everyone once this video goes up. So I'm currently filming on the 21st of February, so you could tell by the Dan and Phil calendar in the background. Timeline, right, so someone else has already done this, but it is outdated but inevitably probably more detailed than the one I'm about to lay out. So that will be linked in the description. And I think we followed like similar logic for some placement stuff. Like I think obviously ones that have concrete dates are going to be exactly the same as the ones in their timeline up to the long forms that had been posted. I'm doing this for fun. So I've constructed this timeline with my headcanons in mind, so it is a bit more biased than the other person who I can't remember the name, Phoebe, I think. I apologize if that's not right. If you disagree with any of the placements for some of these videos, please comment down below and we can talk about it. Some of the videos I will, obviously the ones that have like concrete dates, I won't change the place of because they have concrete dates and there's no point in changing the order of things. But a lot of the earlier long forms I'm not 100% sure on, because if there's nothing that will make it like clearly stated or like alluded to it being in like the 90s or like the distant future, then I will just set it to modern day when the play was published, which might be a bit of a cop-out, but there's only so much I can do. Again, if you want something more detailed, watch the other person's timeline video. This is just for fun and because I wanted to make a playlist of them in order, and I wanted to make this video to explain why why this is the order I put the playlist in. I don't know if I should put this video at the beginning of that playlist. I probably won't, because I plan on continuously updating the playlist as new long forms come out. So eventually this video will also be outdated, but the playlist won't. I might, if this is decently received or something, I might do like an updated timeline thing, like maybe every couple months or once a year or something, but we'll see. But for now, the actual now I've clearly gone on far too long. Now the actual playlist, so I've constructed this playlist with the idea that every single long form takes place in the same universe, which I know Luke doesn't like, but I don't care. Luke, I'm doing this for fun, let me have it. That sounds a bit mean. I like Luke. He's nice, he's lovely, but I feel a bit sad every time he mentions the Marvelization thingy, which I don't understand what he means by that, but this is just for fun, as I've already stated. But anyway, the actual timeline itself. First video in the playlist and first long form is The Bard with a Scar. Now, this video was really hard to place because it could take place literally anywhere. There is no evidence that like contradicts what time period it is, so it could happen at the beginning of the timeline, like I put it at the end, or at the end of the timeline, or when it was published. So, but the way I see it, like this is very blatantly a magical setting. So what I have interpreted as, and have put it at the beginning due to this, is that this is where all of the magic, so like Marjorie's spell, Persephone, I guess the elves, this is where all of it comes from. This is the start of the timeline. This is what the world used to be like, and over time, as like I guess humans became bigger, magic receded slightly, and it became more as human society has. So I don't have a set time period for it, so I've just but here it is. And then the next video, which was actually at the start for a while, is obviously Caesar and Juliet, which I was contemplating, do I put it in the time of Caesar or when the play Romeo and Juliet makes place, but I think it makes more sense for it to follow like Caesar's life. So I have it, and the real life Caesar was executed when he was 55, and that was 44 BC. And since Caesar is not obviously 55, he's 26 in the play, I did some quick maths and took 26 away from 55, which I can't remember the sum of off the top of my head, and then added that to 44. So I got the date 73 BC. Even if that date isn't necessarily like true, it's definitely the second video in the timeline. Now the third video that I think if we have like an actual date that's given in the play is Moist and Magical 1719, which is the first instance after Bard with the Scar, obviously, of a witch coven, which sets up magic and stuff. Not really much to say about Moist and Magical, except it's the only play set in 1719, and obviously it's the first one we get an actual date for. The next video I have is for this timeline is We Love Poetry, which I've put in 1816 because it was the year that it's a year that both Byron was alive and King George III was ruling. The reason I put 1816, is because that was a year that Byron published Atmosphere, I think. He published a poem that year that was, I think, and that's literally the only reason that it's there. So it's that specific date. So I know he was definitely alive, so that Percy could have had a fling with him at the same time. The next long form is actually the most recent long form as of recording, is We're Cowboys, which I've put in 1867. In the Q&A after the long form went up, Luke said that the long form takes place anywhere between the time that the Gatling gun was invented and 1900. So I put it in 1867 because that was the year after the American Civil War ended, and I figured that was a safe date. And I'd like to comment on something. That Felicity, obviously, we all know that scene. Assuming that you've watched it, Felicity, one of Sam's characters, uses a wax strip at one point, and I googled it, and apparently wax strips weren't invented until the 1960s. So apparently Felicity invented wax stripping despite never having left brothel. That's the word. Leaving the brothel. And due to that fact, it will also highlight a rule that I placed myself that I forgot to mention, is that if there is only one mentioned like a modern thing like wax stripping or Agatha Christie in Moist and Magical, but it's the only like modern reference, then I will choose to ignore it and place it in favor of like the general setting. Plus and any information that like that the Shoot from the Hip themselves have said, like Luke saying that it was set in the after the Gatling gun was invented but before the 20th century. I hope that makes sense. But anyway, the next long form after We're Cowboys is Marigold, Bluebells and Hugh, which we don't necessarily have a concrete date, but we know it takes place sometime in the 1870s in Germany. and I'm content with just 1870s, obviously, for like placement wise. But the next long form I have after that is What I Found in the Chimney, which I think would take place in 1874, because that is the year before the 1875 Chimney Sweeping Act, which was basically a law to reduce child labor, and because a chimney sweep who was 12 years old sadly passed away while doing chimney work, while chimney sweeping, which was and I figured if a chimney sweep is currently like setting fire, using like chimney sweeping as a scam to set fire to houses, that would probably also speed up the process of getting rid of chimney sweeps. So that feels safe to me. Alright, so next video in the timeline, like this placement might be a bit controversial among long-time fans, or at the very least fans since this specific long con come out, since we are technically given a date, which would make you think this would be earlier in the timeline, specifically before Were-Cowboys, but you know, after Moist and Magical, which is Death for $1, which I have put like the modern day sections, the ones where Bill is talking to Danny in the bar in 1892, and I know in the play he says 1854 or 1855, sorry, and I tried to make that date work. Hi, Editing Milo here, releasing 1. I didn't introduce myself. Hi, my name is Milo. My pronouns are he, him, they, them. Please be respectful. And 2, what I mean by the timeline placement for Death for $1 being 1954, I don't mean the play itself would be in 1954. I mean 10 years before the scene with Bill and Danny talking about it would be 1954, and I couldn't make that work. I think if that was when the bandits attacked, then the bar scenes between Danny and Bill would be 1964, but I couldn't make that date work either, just for clarification. Logically, with the events that he tells and just context cues in the play itself, but you have to remember that Bill canonically is an unreliable narrator, as shown by like Maria just showing up at the end of the play, and he was also drunk, so it's safe to say that that date probably isn't reliable. So what I think, if that date is any prevalent, I think that's probably more accurately the year that he was born, or something like that, if it does hold any value. So why have I chosen 1892 and not anywhere closer to that? Well, that, technically speaking, this is the first like timeline thing that I figured out before I even decided to make this playlist, was this date. So instead of working, I did this. So I wrote out the events of the story that Bill tells, which we know aren't true, which, to summarize, goes this. Obviously, the bandits attack a farm, Bill gets arrested, Bill and Tony escape to Mexico, Bill meets Maria, Bill and Maria get married, Bill's dad shows up and drags Bill back to the US, Bill defeats the bandits, Maria dies, and then 10 years later Danny is working at the bar. The reason we know it's 10 years later that Danny is working in the bar is because he says at the beginning of it that 10 years ago, that was when the bandits attacked. And Danny, for all we know, has no reason to lie in this situation. And so the thing is, we also learn that 10 years ago, Danny was 7, because obviously he's 17 in the main event of the bar scene. But the thing is, that's also revealed at the end of the play, Bill is Danny's father. So I tried to piece together what the actual events of Death for $1 were, because obviously the story Bill tells isn't accurate because, well, he's lying about Maria dying, and he's also drunk, so we can't necessarily take his word for granted, as shown by the fact he changes the date from 1854 to 1850. So what I chose to do was treat 1854 as the year that Bill was born. And this is where I'm making assumptions, I will admit, so it's entirely possible that this is wrong, but I've chosen 1854 as the year that Bill was born, and so and I did this for a very specific reason, which I will explain when I get to the end. So, and I'm going to say 20 years after Bill was born was obviously 1874, so that's when I think Bill's farm gets attacked and he gets arrested. From there, obviously, he escapes, and obviously Bill runs off to Mexico and then meets, falls in love, and gets married to Maria. And this is where I think things are different, because Bill and Maria would have had to have had sex at least once, because Danny was 7 when the bandits attacked. So that means Maria would have had to have gotten pregnant before Bill is taken back to the US. And it's safe to assume that they got married within like a year, because it was, the 1800s. So I'm going to say that they got married in 1875, and then at some point they had Danny soon after that. So the thing is, I don't think Bill's dad showed up to take Bill home. I think that he was either deported back to America, or it was just that the authorities found him in America and arrested him again. And then Maria must have followed them because, well, either she realized she was pregnant after he was arrested, or they already had a child together and figured, I need to follow him. Obviously, the bandit attack does still happen, but instead, I don't think immediately they think, oh, Bill can deal with it. I think Bill probably was offered to deal with the situation in a way to be pardoned. So the reason I think that Bill is in prison instead of just, being taken by his dad is because Daddy lives 7 years without knowing that Bill is his dad. And presumably those 7 years, either Bill looks really different without hair, or he just wasn't in the picture. And I don't think he would willingly leave Maria and their son on his own. So I think being arrested just makes more sense in my mind, and he's back in prison and stays there for 7 years, meaning Danny grew up without him and wouldn't know he's his dad. And the reason that he was released was to deal with the bandits, and then that was his way of getting acquitted because he saved the town. And then either he already knew Maria was there, or he finds out Maria is, in America, because Maria must have been in America at that point because Danny grew up there. I don't know if Danny was born in America or if he was born in Mexico, but he's already been born at that point anyway. So at some point they go back to Mexico and stage Maria's death, not with an electric chair, because electric chairs weren't invented until the 1890s. So I think 7 years he had in jail after 1875 is 1882. 10 years, and then he deals with the bandits in 1882, which is when Danny is 7 years old, and then 10 years after that is 1892. And the reason that Bill adds electric chairs to the story is because electric chairs have just recently been invented, and he's thinking about them because, as far as he's concerned, he's harboring a criminal who apparently could be killed. I hope that makes sense. Yeah, that's basically the short story as to why I've put Death for a Dollar in 1892. And I'm confident that it is happening in the 1890s. Either way, even if it's not specifically 1892, even if Bill wasn't born in 1854 and wasn't 20 years old when it was happening, because again, the electric chair was invented around that time, and it would make more sense if Bill to incorporate it into his story if he's thinking about it due to harboring a fugitive. Yeah. I'm sorry if that made no sense. If you can't tell, as just like Shoot from the Hip, I'm currently improvising, and it's not going as well as when they do it. Now, probably not as funny either. Definitely not as funny. But anyway, The next play after that, one we get an actual date for, is the off season, which is 1895. Not much to say, it's the date we are given, so that's when it takes place. Now the next play that I have is Lost in Your Eyes, which I've put in the year 1899. It could feasibly work a little bit later in the time than that. The main reason I did this is because at the beginning of the play, Sam is using a washboard, and they were mass produced in the 1860s. They went out of fashion in the 1910s. I pulled up a random number generator, put in 1860 and 1910 or sometime a little later than that, and got 1899. This is one of the dates that I'm fine with changing, but it feels like it would take place sometime like towards the end of the 19th century and towards the beginning of the 20th. So I feel comfortable with Lost in Your Eyes being here, but please, if you think it would happen like earlier or later, please tell me in the comments, because I will rearrange this playlist. Next long form, which we have another concrete date for because it's given in the play, thank you AJ, is The Haunted Diary, which is 1905. Nothing more to say about that. The next in a play I think is happening the same year is The Final Baker of Baker Street. So in this, Sherlock references him and Moriarty going over the waterfall. So I looked up that book. I know it's the one that Arthur Conan Doyle intended to be the last Sherlock book, so that's why Sherlock and Moriarty were killed off. And then I looked up what the next book was that was published after that. It came out in 1905, so it made sense for The Final Baker of Baker Street to be happening the same year to me. I could feasibly put it a bit later, but to me 1905 feels right. But I'm not that big into Sherlock. I've never really read any of it, so if you're really into Sherlock and have a different opinion for when this play would take place, please let me know. Okay, next year, and this one's going to be a bit more, another one that's contentious, is 1914. And the first play I have that takes place this year is Never Give Annabelle a Gun, which I think that this one, more so than Death from a Dollar, is probably going to confuse a lot of people. Why have I put it in this year when it very clearly has an old western feel to it? And honestly, a part of it is to do with the epilogue of Red Dead Redemption, which it also, spoilers for Red Dead Redemption, takes place in 1914, but it does still feel like a western. So in my mind that makes sense. And also due to the popular headcanon that the bartender in this play is also Danny from Death for a Dollar. And honestly, and I really like that headcanon too, so I needed to figure out a way for Death for a Dollar to take place in 1892 too, because I do generally really like that as a year for Death for a Dollar, mainly because of the electric chair thing, and for Danny to be in Never Give Annabelle a Gun and have a fully grown daughter and a grandson. So and if he's 17 in 1892, he would be 42 in 1914, and I've made the assumption that his daughter is 20, meaning that he would have had his daughter at 22, which I know is early, but it was also, you know, like the early what would have been like the late 1800s, so I feel like that's a fair ideal to make. And like, he feels 42 in the play, maybe a bit older, but I feel like 42 is a decent age to be. No, and then this is assuming that the kid is like 1 or 2 years old, which again, a 20-year-old having a baby does seem very young, but 1914. But yeah, Death for a Dollar and Never Give Annabelle Guns are the dates that I feel pretty confident in and won't be changing, in all honesty, unless it's to move them up slightly. I don't think Never Give Annabelle a Gun though could take place any later than 1914, purely based off of well, industrialization. Even but if it's not necessarily like when we assumed the play would take place, I think 1914 is specifically at like the start of 1914 is definitely a good year for Annabelle to take place, in my opinion. and I won't be changing it in the timeline. I'm sorry. The next play in the timeline is The Leftmost Window, which would start in 1914, but then I think ends in 1915. And then the next play after that which also set during World War One, is in 1916, is Ballet on the Battlefield. Now this, which is another concrete date we're given, and this is the one of the first, I guess, inconsistencies that you could see in placing all of the Longforms in the same universe, in the fact seemingly the war ends in 1915 in this universe, but then it's still going on the year later in Ballets on the Battlefield. What I can only assume is that the war ended in 1915 for the British, but went on like a year or so longer for the Russians, which I think is feasible. And it could, in a similar way in real life, that the English for World War II, that the English pulled out before the Americans did, because the Americans were mainly fighting Japan, if that makes sense. It doesn't necessarily matter, but just my thought. The Russians and the Germans were just fighting a bit longer. Then the next one, which I've mainly placed here due to headcanons, that I've put down here after Ballet on the Battlefield in 1922, is Priscilla's Final Petal. And I put it in 1922 specifically because this is the year before Germany experience hyperinflation. If you've ever seen Horrible Histories, and they do the historical Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, where they talk about how they kept winning money, but all the money was worth was just a wheelbarrow every single time he gained a new amount, that was what the hyperinflation was, in a really rushed way. Sorry. But yeah, I put Priscilla's Final Petal in 1922 because of a couple of headcanons. The first one being that I think that Annabelle is the daughter of Hugh and Inga from Marigold's Bluebell and Hugh, which would make Priscilla the great-granddaughter of the Bluebell King. The reason I think Annabelle is the daughter is their daughter is mainly because of the Buttercup connection thing. And in my mind, one of the reasons that she was linked to Buttercups, besides obviously Rumpel being a wizard, is because if she's the granddaughter of the Bluebell King, she would have some connection to nature. I did worry for a bit that Annabelle would have been born, wouldn't be an appropriate age to have had a child at that point, in 1922. Alright, took a moment, wrote down what I was thinking, because I wasn't making any sense, and figured this would just be the best way to explain it. So this one will flow a little different to how the video has so far, but I want it to make sense in my head. Okay, so to reiterate, I believe that Annabelle is Hugh and Inga's daughter, and I was worried that her age wouldn't be viable enough to have Priscilla. Let's assume that Priscilla is 10 during the events of the play, which we're going to place in 1922 for the sake of this timeline. This means she would have been born in 1912. I was worried at first that this would have made Annabelle too young to have had a daughter, but depending on when Hugh and Inga have her, she would have been in her 20s or 30s. According to my research, aka Google, people in the 1800s were having children as early as 20, though I think it was probably younger. So using that as a point of reference, Inga and Hugh would have had Annabelle 10 years after the events of Marigold's Bluebells and Hugh. say the play took place in 1870, the earliest it possibly could have taken place, Annabelle would have been born in 1880, which making her 32 in 1912. Then, on the other end of that, saying the play took place in 1879, the latest it possibly could have, that means Annabelle would have been born in 1889, making her 23 in 1912. And while it is young to have a child by today's standards, it wouldn't have been for 1912. So Annabelle was anywhere between 23 and 32 when she had Priscilla. All of that to say, to explain away my headcanon and my worries surrounding age. Generally, I don't script things because I want my videos to feel natural and to feel like not forced and like we're having a conversation, basically. But that being said, but I understand that I do mumble and get jumped around a lot. So for the foreseeable future, would you like me to script things out, or would you like me to, if I get too jumbled, to do what I just did and write out my thoughts and then just read them back to you? Just food for thought. And I'm sorry if that didn't make a whole lot of sense or if it was too rambly, but beforehand the writing thing, but I'm getting distracted from the actual timeline itself. So all that to say, I think 1992 is when Priscilla's final petal takes place, because the year after that, in 1923 is when hyperinflation happens in Germany, and I figured and Priscilla's final petal is set in Germany because obviously her dad's the Earl of Saxony. And fun fact, his wife, whether it be Annabelle or Mrs. Langbrook, would have been the Countess, because that's the female equivalent to an Earl, apparently. Yeah, and one of the reasons I think hyperinflation would be more important is to do with a different hand canon that I'll bring up when we get to the next play that concerns that. I have a whole family tree planned. You can tell this stuff isn't scripted anymore, but anyway, I have a whole family tree planned that starts with the Bluebell King and Hugh's mother, and ends with, well, you'll find out if you keep watching the video. But anyway, after Priscilla's final petal is the Great Depression, which takes place in 1925 because they state it in the play. And then the next one I have is taking place in 1927, which is The Mystery of the Midnight Circus. I put this here because this is the year that the last Sherlock book was published by Arthur Conan Doyle, the original writer. And obviously there has been a lot of media and stories of Sherlock after that point, but 1927 feels like a good year for it to take place. Though feasibly it could happen a bit earlier. Please comment your thoughts. Then the next one, which again, another concrete date, 1942, oh my god, is this a joke? Which, funny enough, means that Jean-Claude, AJ's character, would have been captured and held for 2 years because France was occupied in 1940, and Jean-Claude has no idea that this has happened when he gets back, so it doesn't impact the timeline anyway. It's just an interesting thought. Then the next thing, which could technically happen in the 50s or the 60s, but I've just put in the 50s because it has more of a 50s vibe to me, is The Detective versus the Christmas Tree Bandits. Next one, which another concrete date, is 1963, the Oopsie Daisy Bulge, which is one of my favorite of like the earlier long forms. In all honesty, I think it's really fun. It's also the shortest long form they've ever done. Next one, with another concrete date, the main events of the play take place in 1964, which is the pilot's final fight. Obviously, the opening takes place in 1949, but the main event's 15 years later, 1964. Then the next one, which I think is another one that will be contested, is The Office Affair, which I have put in 1973. Originally, I did think that this would take place in like the 50s or the 60s. I get a 60s vibe from this play. I know a lot of people probably don't, but I do. But the reason I put in 1973 is because in this scene, I don't know if I'll do it, Sam as Joe has having an unnamed phone call conversation with a character that Tom's playing. And it's very blatantly a phone call. And handheld phones, the first handheld phone was created in 1973. So the earliest this play could take place is 1973. Usually I would chalk this up to being just a continuity mistake because it's improv. But this is the next play that's included in my family tree timeline, which I literally just mentioned with Priscilla. And also 1973 makes a bit more sense for like a woman being like the chief of police, more so than like the 50s. The main thing that this does come to my family tree thing, which you might be slightly confused with, at the like big climactic moment when Darcy is confronting Joe about being Joe. Joe says,
Darcy, you were always smartest of my kids.
To me, from this, I've headcanoned that most of the other Dons in the Shoot from the Hip universe are Joe's other children who are trying to pick up where she left off. Specifically, the Don Albert, who were never given a last name of, Albert in We Buried the Wrong Body. And then above that, my other headcanon for Albert is that his mother, or other mother, is Priscilla. And the reason I think that Priscilla is Don Albert's mum is because of the flowers. And so Don Albert obviously picks the flowers and poisons them and uses like metaphors with death constantly to do with flowers, right? And in my mind, he gets that from Priscilla. The reason I think this is because if my bio mum rose from a bed of flowers and possessed me, I'm going to think of flowers, mainly buttercups, but broadening flowers in general, in like a negative way and associate them with death for the rest of my life. And Priscilla unintentionally gave on like this negative conversation with flowers to her son Albert. Also, Albert having an English name despite being Italian would make a bit more sense with Priscilla, because I think she's German, but obviously both of her parents, or all three of her parents, are seemingly English for some reason. So Albert gets an English name. And on top of that, it would explain Belladonna, bitch mum, whatever you want to call it. I like Belladonna personally because, again, the flower connection gets all of her English like terminology from. She probably just got it secondhand from her dad. So yeah, my crack ship is aged up Priscilla and Joe Mama. Yeah, and the reason I thought that the hyperinflation would be important is because like Priscilla's family was already in debt at that point, and considering she'd basically banned off music, she probably would have lost her scholarship, presuming the school didn't close due to the hyperinflation. And so Mrs. Langbrook probably would then migrate somewhere else. And like usually you think England, but maybe America would probably be more tempting, probably due to the whole land of the free thing. Yeah. And then I think Darcy's the youngest of all of Joe Mama's kids, because I think Priscilla probably passed away shortly after she was born, or maybe like a couple years after she was born, because I don't think there would be any way Joe would be able to become her mum like full time without Priscilla being there. But yes, that's my family tree headcanon, basically. I have a family tree pictured here for reference, and I'll yeah, that kind of went off track a little bit from the timeline, but I didn't really know where I'd put it. But yeah, so basically, I think Big Jimmy Johnny Jr. is the descendant of the Bluebell King. That's basically to summarize it. But anyway, and I think the office affair takes place in 1973 because of the handheld phones. Right, next play, which takes Beetroots and Murder. And I know the bulk of it takes place in the past, but we're gonna use it in the same way that Death for a Dollar does. The present day events of the play are where will place in the timeline. I think the present day events, when Sam's character, who I think the community has just named Sam, takes place in the 1980s, which is why I've put it here in the timeline, because he's 45 current day, and we know that when he was 18 it was the 1950s, so that's about 27 years. So we don't have a specific date for the 1950s, but if it's anywhere from 1953 onwards, it would be squarely in like the 1980s. Anywhere, if it's 1950 to 1952, then it would take place in the 70s. Yeah, nothing necessarily more to say of that. Then next one, another concrete date, 1997, Line Under the Bridge. Now the next one, next two actually, which I've put in 1998, is Highway to Hell and Long Dong's Strike. The reason I've put Highway to Hell here is because, again, in the Q&A for this play, Sam says that it takes place in the 90s, but during the play itself, Sam's character Ryan says that he googled the premiere in amenities. So Google was launched in 1998, so that is the earliest it could take place. And the same goes for Long Dong's Strike, which I've put on the same day that it was released, September 5th, because I feel like that's generally when September is when it starts to get colder in England, obviously. Yeah, England, obviously, and that's where it takes place. And where the police captain, also played by Sam, does say that he Googles an address at one point, so 1998 feels comfortable. And Long Dong's Strike feels like very Cold War-esque, but we also know it doesn't. It takes place after 1993, so 1998 feels comfortable. Editing Milo again. I want to clarify the reason I don't do my rule of ignoring the modern day reference is because other characters directly respond to the modern day reference in this. Like Luke's Russian character acknowledges the fact that Ryan googled something, and in Highway to Hell, and in Long Dong's Strike, Luke's police officer character groans when Sam says he's googled it. Alright? If you have issue with that, let me know in the comments, I guess. Now, the next play, which I've put in 2003, is on December 25th, is Nutcrackers and Cancelled Flights. Originally, I thought this play took place in 1981. The main reason I believed this is because of the type of phone that Helen, Tom's character, is using, because it has a speaker at the top, and you flip it down to have like the receiver thing. I can't remember specifically what it's called. And the only model of phone I could find for that was this one from Science Museum. I can't remember specifically what it's called. That is dated to 1981. It's entirely possible that there are later models in this, but this is the only one I could find. Maybe that's my poor research. And you know, generally it feels very much like it could be a 1981 story, mainly due to the fact it's in the north and there is mines. But then Sam mentions a nutcracker. Obviously, what the nutcracker is dressed as Jack Sparrow. This never comes up again, but considering that the nutcrackers is like essential to the plot, it's safe to say that I don't think I can use like my ignore one modern reference rule if it's never come up again, because it's literally in the title of the play, so technically speaking it's always being referenced, and obviously the nutcracker comes in at the end as well. Sorry, the camera shook, I just knocked the desk. Right. Originally, I thought that maybe due to the fact that the mines are mentioned, that there's no way it could like not take place during the 80s, but the thing is, the last mine was actually closed in 2015, so it's entirely possible that they could still work in a mine in 2003. But and then I thought maybe the car brand, the Skeletrix, maybe that would be define the decade, but no, that's a brand that's still going on to this day. So 2003 was when Pirates of the Caribbean came out, so made sense to me that would be the year this would take place, which I'm kind of sad about. I was so excited when I got the year 1981, but hey ho. Next year, 2004, I have put on August 14th apparently, The Neighbours Under the Bed. Now the reason I did this is because of Raccoon City, and as far as I'm concerned, Raccoon City was still nuked in 1998. Don't come at me, Resident Evil fans, if that's wrong. And the reason I think this, well, I just think it's fun, and plus we have 2 plays that take place during a zombie apocalypse. Why not to just canonize the events of the Resident Evil franchise in this universe? In the end of the day, this is just for fun. But yeah, I put 2004 for the events of Neighbor Under the Bed. Right, editing Milo again, except this time I brought out the tripod because I needed to record something more than just a couple seconds long. So basically I didn't like what I'd said for Neighbor Under the Bed, so I've done the same thing I did for Annabelle's age, and have written out and will now read to you in hopes that it's more concise and makes more sense with my thought process. So, originally, I had this play set in 2037 because I had just placed the football game where Martha and her husband met, be the year before Raccoon City was nuked, 1997, and added on 30 years so that Janae's comment about them being in a middle-aged relationship still made sense. But then I remembered that Martha had been to the globe in 1974, so there's no way that her husband could have been 10 in 1997 without things getting creepy. While I do think Martha is older than her husband, she's not that much older. So instead I said that 1974 was the year that the football match took place, for simplicity. We'll say Martha was 11 or 12, and her future husband is obviously 10. Then 30 years after 1974 is 2004. The reason I have it placed on August 14th is because, according to Wikipedia, that's when the Premier League began in 2004, explaining why Martha's husband is doing with the Withering Rangers when he leaves. Presumably he's now the manager, as he's way past the normal retiring age for a football player. And as bonus, 2004 is the year after X2, the second X-Men film, came out, so Sam's character would have been able to see it, and to make that crude comment about Nightcrawler. It also means Sam's character is actively rooting for a potentially dead team. That's everything I wanted to say. And then the next play, which I think also takes place in 2004, specifically on October 6th, is The Phantom of Hornchurch. By the date being October 6th is just from, I think, the day the Longform was released, but the 2004 year is because that was the year that Johnny Bravo ended and Danny Phantom began. And if it was set like when it was released, Julian wouldn't know what Danny, as a 10-year-old, wouldn't know what Danny Phantom or Johnny Bravo is, since both of them are off the air, obviously. So in my mind, it would just make more sense for it to take place in 2004, maybe 2005, 2006, but just like around the time when those shows were actively, airing close together, so that Julian would know what those references are. But yeah, the next player that I've put into 2012 is Susan's Holiday, and I did this because of the Uber driver, and that was the year that Uber was founded. This is one of the things that me and the other person who made the other timeline video used similar logic for, in that that was the year that Uber was launched, and it's very rare that you'll get the same Uber driver, even if it is the exact same address, going to the exact same place, like present day. So it makes sense if Uber's in its infancy, and so they probably don't have that many Uber drivers. So that's why I put it in 2012. The next one, which I put in 2013, is And So It Begun. And the reason I did this is because in Resident Evil 6, and since we're canonizing Resident Evil, at least I am, is the year when I think either a global outbreak, or at the very least an outbreak in America of the virus takes place, happens, and so it makes sense to me that is the year And So It Begun to take place. That's literally my only reasoning for it, because I think that's fun. And I know Resident Evil 6 is like the most hated game in the Resident Evil franchise, but in this specific context, I think it really plays into the favor of this specific game. Yeah. Then the next play after that is No Time to Die. It says in the play that Lionel, Sam's character, who started the outbreak, says that it's been 5 years since the outbreak, and since we see like the beginning of the outbreak in And So It Begun, that's why that's 2013, and since it's been 5 years since that, so 2018 is 5 years later, that's when it ends. And in my mind, Sam's scientist character, who I can't remember the name of currently, could absolutely be working for Umbrella. Right, so the next play I have is in 2021, is the Cardboard Stegosaurus, and this is because of the fact, mainly because of Brexit, and the way that Sam's French character talks about Brexit as if it's just happened, and 2021 is when Brexit was finalized. And many headcanon theory is, I wonder if that's the reason why America jumped. I know that's really dark, but food for thought. Then 2022 is the year, obviously, they started uploading more long forms properly. So a lot of them I have put in this year. Though ironically, the first one we started with is not one that was published in 2022. It's in burglary and bobsledding, which I put in March of that year, because in February 2022 is when the Winter Olympics took place, and I figured it would make more sense for it to take place in 2022 than 2024, because generally if shoot from the hip reference events that happen yearly, it makes more sense to me to put them in the years that they've already happened than the years going forward, generally. Right, next one I have in May. In May is the Midnight Mystery. I have it in May 2022 because it came out in 2022, but in May, that's when roses bloom. And then August 12th, I've put the Meringue Haberdashery. This is one that I'm not sure about. I feel like it could happen a lot earlier in the timeline, but because there's no evidence to sway either way what time period it would take place in, outside of Question Time, which has been airing for years, I think just having it the day it released currently is alright. But if you have a more concrete, that's the word again, idea of when this would take place, please comment down below and let me know. And then 30th is the Dark Moons of Slough. Since they make reference to modern day celebrities, definitely I think of this one I do feel more confident about. September 19th, Too Big to Be a Jockey, which This is another one that I think could happen earlier, but there's no evidence to sway it either way. Then December 4th, the hare who wore a sweater. This one I think safe to say definitely probably takes place in modern day, but it could happen a bit earlier, but any point after GoFundMe exists. Then the 11th of December, Once Upon a Time I Killed Mother. Another one that could happen at any point. There's nothing that sways either way. Now we're on to 2023 and February 16th, Bus. No, it's that one I know definitely takes place in 2023 because of the ages of JJ's character's roommates. They're them being like in their 60s and having being 8 when BD first published his books, and it lines up pretty well. So that one I'm pretty confident does take place in 2023. Then March 12th, All Eyes on Nigel. I think there's nothing really necessarily to sway this either way, outside of the Manchester police being less racist. Then April 16th, Wild, Wet and Worrisome, another one that could take place anytime, but I've just have it there for now. June 25th, The Ingredients. Again, another one that could take place anytime, but I've just put there for simplicity. July, The Milkman. We know that this one released in 2023, and it does, and Sam does say that it is July, so that makes sense. Then, and so it's like half of a concrete answer. Very blatantly does take place in modern day. And the 10th of July, The Incited Chinchilla, which I thought originally this would take place in the 90s, but then Theresa May and Liz Truss are mentioned, and so makes sense it's 2023. In 2024, February 4th, The Evil Make-A-Wish Kid. The day it was published, there's nothing necessary to sway it otherwise. It very confidently takes place Monday. June 9th, Lighthouse. This one, another one that could take place anytime, any place. There's nothing to sway it anyway. July 5th, The Prime Minister's First Day. This one I have here because July 5th, 2024 is the day that our current Prime Minister was sworn in. And originally I did have this one in 2019 when the last administration ended, I think, began. I can't remember specifically off the top of my head, but since they make references to King Charles, it makes sense for it to take place in 2024. Then in August, I have The Unrelenting Aubergine, because it clearly takes place in modern day, but when August is when aubergines are in season. And then 25th, Toby's Secret Pocket, another one that could happen any which way, but I've just put for its release date. November 17th, Strange Noises from the Hole in the Wall. This one definitely does take place in 2024 because that's when, obviously, that's what Sam's character, Tommy Billy Benjamin, says at the end of the play. And yeah, fun fact, if Clarissa would have been in her 60s when trains were invented. And then December 25th, obviously, Divorces and Teddy Bears, because Santa does say it takes place in that the Great Battle happened 1,000 years ago in 1024, so it takes place in modern day in 2024. Then 2025, January 19th, Chris's DIY Wedding, another one that could happen anyway. March 30th, the Hobnob Fair. It's got it on March 30th because that's when daylight savings happened in 2025, and so it's a couple of days later than it was published, but not by much. I originally was going to look into Magic Mike. Well, I did look into Magic Mike thinking that, I could look when they went to Dubai in 2025, or if they've ever been to Dubai, but no, they've never been to Dubai. That was overthinking. Then April 27th, Sorry About My Nan, because obviously there's nothing to sway it each other way. And then May 11th, The Creek in the Attic. Again, nothing to sway it this way or that. June, Green Leaves on a Summer Day. This one I put a couple months earlier than when it was released because it obviously takes place during summer. And yeah, so I'm in June. 9th of June, The Enigma of the High Visionary. which definitely takes place in modern day because of the Star Wars references. I did check those. Though, funnily enough, when Thomas Jr. Says to Thomas, ironically Tom's character, that he missed Mandalorian season 2. That came out in 2020, so I guess he just didn't like Mandalorian season 1 or something, to have skipped all of the other things but still be up to date on everything else. I don't know. Food for thought. It's not necessarily important, it's just I thought that was a bit weird. And then July 20th, I don't want to visit grandma. Modern day references and stuff, I don't really have a way to verify this. This one, another one that I'd be comfortable changing. Okay, this one I'm a little embarrassed to admit, but somehow I completely forgot, after making such a fuss about it earlier in the video. We Buried the Wrong Body, which was out on August 3rd. I don't know how I managed to miss that, but I did. Since it is very blatantly takes place in modern day because of Minecraft, but feasibly it could take place in the 2010s as well, because obviously that's when Minecraft was also extremely popular, and I'd argue Minecraft YouTubers were more popular than they are now. Yeah. But fun fact, Johnny and Big Jimmy are a year younger than me, which I thought was interesting. Then 31st, The Screams of the Damned. And then September, I've put the Lollipops Ladies Revenge, which is a couple, I think about a month later than when it was actually published, and that's because September is when school starts in England, so it makes sense for it to have happened in September. Then September 29th, I have The Sins of the Gardener. That's because matriculation at Cambridge happens on October 1st, at least according to Google, so it makes sense for to take place like a couple days before October 1st. So that'd be the 29th or the 30th of September. And then October 5th, The Game of Truth or Tea. That's just the day it was published. Editing Milo here again, hopefully for the last time, because I'm near the end of the video, and now I'm standing up because someone stole my seat. Upon editing, I've just found out that I forgot completely, somehow, the last lullaby, which takes place on the 2nd of November. And then December 21st, An Assassin's Nightmare, which is the day, obviously, the Big Boys special came out. There's nothing necessarily that sways it this way or that. You'll notice in the playlist that the special, the Edinburgh special, beginning of the playlist, after Marigolds, Bluebirds and Hill, Hugh, because I'm more certain about that date than I am An Assassin's Nightmare. Then 2026, January 18th, The Glass Eye. It's funny enough the only play currently set in 2026. And now we get into the 4 plays which I'm pretty sure take place in the future. So 2028, Inside the Mysterious Cube. It says it takes place 12 years after Obama died, and presuming that was his last year in office, that would be 2016. It says that AJ's president is Biden. So that means Biden got his 2nd term in this universe. That's probably good for them, I suppose. Yeah, and I'm certain that it was 2016 that Obama died, because the security guard does say that he served 3 presidents, and if Biden's the 3rd president, we know who goes between Obama and Biden, so it makes sense in my head that this takes place in 2028. And then the next one, which I've put in 2079, is No, I Always Loved That Caravan. And that might confuse some of you, which is fair. The reason I put it in 2079 is because of Arthur Scargill. Arthur Scargill is a real person, for those of you who are unaware, who is currently, as of recording, still alive. He is 88. And Luke's character Marjorie, who's only in the beginning of the play, who's Sam's character's mum, says that Arthur Scargill is her great granddad. So Arthur has at least one child who's currently known. I think he also has more, but don't know about them for privacy reasons, obviously. And she was born in 1962. So I use that as a baseline for 1962. I looked up, and obviously that's boomers, I looked up generally when boomers were having children, like what their age was, and that was 25. So I had the hypothetical child born in 1987, which would make them a millennial. Yes, millennial. And generally, which means that Marjorie, Luke's character, would have been born either in the 2010s or the 2020s for her to be the great grandchild. So for math's sake, I put her born in 2020, and then I figured, looking at how old a lot of people currently are having children are, I had her have Sam's character in 2055, which would make him 24 in 2079, which to me feels like he's a couple years out of university, and that feels like a comfortable age you would be when you start making films. And I know that the play has a lot of references to modern day, like Timothy Chalamet, Little Women, and specifically Timothy Chalamet being a Little Woman, and I think Sam's Texan character saying how old America is, but for Sam's character to be the great grandson of Arthur Scargill, he would have to have been born in either the 2050s or the 2040s to the 2050s. So I'm comfortable with 2079. It could be a couple years earlier, feasibly. Yeah, and I just think that's fun to have it in 2079, and it makes sense in my head. The next play is Murders in Space, which by the end of it, I've put in 2107. And I did that based off of Cletus's age, and him being a serial killer, murderer, whatever. And generally murderers are specifically men. He'd be in his 30s, mid-30s to mid-40s, so I had him be 40. And he got a 30-year life sentence, meaning by the time he was supposed to finish his sentence, he'd be in his 70s, which felt like a decent age. And we know he was born in 2037, so 40 years after 2037, 7 is 2077, and 30 years after 2077 is 2107. So the last scene where Tom's wife character is creating that rocket would be 2107, and the play would have begun had we seen it in 2077 or 2078. And now the last play in this timeline, which I'm pretty sure is the furthest play that they've ever done, technically, besides maybe Patreon content. I need to rewatch some of those plays. I know the dystopian one they did with Midge definitely probably is the furthest, but for the public long forms currently, Lemons on a Plane, and which might seem out of left field, which it's you might think Milo or Sobs or whatever, you've lost it. Why would this play take place in 2117? Well, you see, and originally I thought, oh, this probably takes place modern day when it was uploaded, right? But thing is, I did some Googling about the brand Mr. Kipling. First off, unfortunately, it's not a family brand. It's actually a completely emotional thing in the game, and the name was picked for commercial reasons, not because it's a family name, unfortunately. And you know, and Luke says that in the play, the company, Kipling's, have existed for 150 years, or nearly 150 years, probably assuming that the company was founded in the late 1800s, early 1900s, like a lot of companies in Britain, and I'm sure other countries are. And it's a fair thing to think. But the thing is, Mr. Kipling as a brand was created in 1967. You know what 150 years after 1967 is? 2117. So, however way you slice it, this play takes place either during or before or after 2117, meaning it is the furthest published long form currently to date as of filming, which is fun. Thank you for watching this madness of me rambling and one scripted section. I'm running out of space to film. I've only got about 2 minutes left before I run out of space, unfortunately, and I am doing this on my phone and my camera's still broken, so I can't suddenly switch to that. But thank you again. I do appreciate you watching this, and I hope you enjoyed this madness. And thing I've spent majority of my half term doing, which is making timeline, researching dates, and putting together my family tree, all the way from of the Bluebell King to Johnny Jr. If you want to read about that family tree, read my fic Family Lines when that comes out properly. I'm stuck on the intro right now because I don't know how will readings work. If you know how will readings work, please comment down below so I can actually get the first chapter of Family Lines out. Thank you again for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I don't know when the next video with me specifically in front of the camera will be. Presumably TikTok compilation will go out after I've published this or before it. I don't know. I haven't done any of that yet. I need to go shopping and I'm nearly out of footage. But thank you for watching. I hope this wasn't too long. Bye.